free to move around as it may be helpful to see or otherwise. Well, I was in Los Angeles for the past week, and so I'm so thankful for this muggy, wet Oregon. I encourage you, if this gets a little old or frustrating for you, just go someplace dry and industrial for a few days, and you'll come back to this sweet embrace of the green valley. Well, this morning I'll make some time for questions, and in a way of inviting that, I just wanted to say, when we have an opportunity for questions and responses from a teacher here at Buddha Eye, sometimes it can be hard to know what is it okay to ask, or what are you supposed to be asking a question about. And there are many things you could ask a question about. It could be about a Buddhist teaching that you're studying or that you've heard in some way, and there's some inquiry that's alive there for you. Or it could just be as simple as people are always talking about prajnaparamita, and I don't know what that is, So sometimes it will be, it might be really like you've been kind of really working with something, and then a question's coming out of it. Sometimes it's just like, I don't get it. Could you tell me about this? Also, it's fine to ask questions about things that are rattling around in your life, and then you say well, what does Buddha Dharma have to do with this? Is there any way that there may be some teachings from Buddhism that respond to that? There may be things in the tradition or in teachings that you've run against that feel particularly inspiring, and you just want to you want to know more about it. There might be things that are challenging, and you want to say, what is that? Why is that going on? There could be, just very simple questions about practice, or about how to engage in a particular practice. Or there may be a very fine, detailed point. Maybe you're working with breath, and you're saying, I often hear you say, let breath be natural. But what does that even mean for something to be natural? Does that mean that I should just forget about it? Or is there something else I should be doing? Anyway, there's very, very broad thing that's okay to ask a question about. I would say, I've been asking myself this question for a long time. What is a bad question? And I've come up with two answers. There may be more than these two, but these are the two I've come up with so far. One is a question that's not really a question, like the one that starts out with, don't you think that? Not a question, right? So there's many varieties, more subtle varieties of questions that aren't questions. So that's not such a good question. Technically, it's just not a question, so we don't even have to call it a bad question. And then the other kind of bad question is one that you don't ask, is one that you kind of keep hidden from yourself and then hidden from the community. Because it doesn't mean any question is always ripe for asking, but it means that you don't want to hide them away. Once they're ripe and you can kind of feel them there, it's good to give them airtime. This may be the right opportunity for that, or it may be another opportunity. I can't know that. You can't either. All you can do is jump in. So with that, what's shaking?
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
You mentioned prajnaparamita.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about veneration practices, because that's something that I'm interested in exploring, mostly with Avalokiteshvara. But can you just say more about practicing with prajnaparamita and how that might look as a veneration practice?
Sure.
Look isn't really the word I want, but I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. So I think for many people, there will come a point where we feel drawn to a particular personification of the Dharma, a person of the Dharma that may, for the most part, will not be an embodied person, like you and I are pretending to be right now, at least. And what I mean by that is, so a bodhisattva like Avalokiteshvara, or Prajnaparamita, who is the mother of the Buddhas. And when we feel that call, I very much want to encourage people to step closer to whatever personification it is calling to you or resonates for you. And so that's the first and simple but difficult to not make complicated step, What makes the step challenging is that to keep it really simple and not to overburden it with expectation or complication of theory or anything like that, is just to step a little bit closer. And we have wonderful ways to do that within the tradition. So we have all the kinds of things that we do, like in a service on Sunday morning, offering incense, making prostrations, chanting sutras, dedicating the merit to that personification as well as to other beings. And so a very simple step towards that being, I think, is really the most important thing. Iconography can be very helpful in this. Iconography is not just a picture. Iconography in its truest sense is a gateway. So it's good to look for an image, or maybe I would say to open yourself up to the images of that personification. Just pay attention. Like, do an image Google search of Avalokiteshvara and go through, pages and pages and pages. Which one is the one that really is like hitting you? Mm-hmm. And it's not about what's right or what's wrong. It's about which one is really hitting you. And then look closer, feel more completely. When you identify then with a icon, then all of those veneration practices are inviting you into the gateway that personification is holding. So in the case of Avalokiteshvara, this is the heart of compassion. Mm-hmm. And so we can very simply lean into that image and into that heart, and then that gateway will present itself in very, sometimes very subtle ways, sometimes very dramatic ways, but then we trust in it. So that's kind of the foundation. Mm-hmm. And further on Daihishin, or on Avalokiteshvara, I would say Dharani practice is really, really important. So Dharani are incantations. That's how we translate that sometimes. It's a little like a word mantra. Many people have heard the term mantra before. Dharani is a kind of incantation that's usually longer than a mantra. Mantra is usually shorter, and it's for like one personification of Dharma. So like for Avalokiteshvara, the most famous one that almost everyone knows, Om Mani Padme Hum. Mm-hmm. That comes from Tibetan Vajrayana tradition. Om Arodikya Soaka is another mantra. But when you come to the Dharani, then this Dharani we chant every Sunday morning. Namu Karatanno Torayaya Namu Riya Buryokshi. This is the great compassionate heart Dharani. To chant that over and over. Both in formal venerative practice, but then throughout the day or at any time, to really embrace and be embraced by the Dharani. Particularly for compassion practices, compassion is not about getting it. It's not about understanding. It's not about what's like knowing. In fact, all of those things become a huge stumbling block to the real embrace of compassion. And so the Dharani are so powerful practice for that, because they require us to release our cognitive grasp in order to be able to meet the world more fully. So it can seem like, I could never remember that whole thing. So you don't have to. Just remember the first couple of lines. Namu Karatan no Torayaya Namu Riya Burikichi Shivaraya. That's pretty good. Okay. And then do that just over and over and over and over again. And then what you'll find is it might start getting bigger, it might start getting longer. And then also this is the last thing I'll say, the Daihishin Dharani, the Dharani of the great compassionate heart. This one, people are making mistakes all the time. Like my friend Yoke, who many of you met, friend and colleague who was here last week, he came over for dinner and he wanted to read sutras for Satsuki at the altar. That's our daughter who passed away 5 years ago. And he said, you're the probably only like priest that was here most of the time who was offering sutras for her, and I'm here now, so I want to offer sutras for her, and was so touched. And so when he came to our house for dinner, he brought his kesai and he put it on and everything. And then right before he was starting, he says, I have this bad habit of making a mistake in the Daihichin Dharani, because it sounds the same as you go through it. So many places are the same. And it's a wonderful kind of compassion that Gyoke has to be able to share his weakness with other people. And I said, oh, no problem, we'll all be chanting together, and if we just go around and around for a while, it's no problem. But that's the quality of the Dharani, is that you can go round and around. You don't have to worry about it being right. That's not the point. And then we can find something flowing through our own heart there.
Pedro?
Hey.
Could you give us a refresher on the iconography of our altars?
Sure.
And just to say that I know in some temples that I've been to, it's more elaborate, and other temples and Zen centers it's very minimal.
Yeah. We're trying to help them, but Just kidding. Not that much. So this is something I think is really wonderful about our tradition, and I think it's something that's important in Western Buddhism that we create a stronger understanding of and more deep relationship with. There's always a big tug when you're in a particular religious environment that has certain currents, that you get pulled into those currents very strongly. And we're in a very strong monotheistic current, which has a whole bunch of beautiful things, which I don't mean to criticize that, but just to say Buddhism is not a monotheistic religion. It's not, and we could argue it's not a theistic religion as well. But as we explore the iconography, it gives us some other basis for how it is that we encounter the religious life that won't snap back to a kind of impression, even of those of you who have rebelled against, I know many of you have rebelled against a monotheistic upbringing, but rebelling actually energizes you back to snap back into it, just in another, in another form, whether it's a religious form or a political ideology or, whatever. So in our hall, the main iconography at the center of the altar here is Shakyamuni Buddha. It's very common for a Soto Zen temple to have Shakyamuni Buddha as the central image. Not always, but that's the most common. And for the Buddha to be in a meditation pose with this was translated as the cosmic mudra. It's like this. But for the Buddha, the right hand is on top of the left hand. For us, the left hand is on top of the right hand. So you can notice that when you see Buddha. Like here, for humans, otherwise deluded beings, not only humans, but deluded beings, we put the wisdom is the left, and action is the right. So we put the wisdom on top of the action, so hopefully the wisdom will help to express our action through wisdom. But for a Buddha, the action comes naturally through the wisdom, and so action is placed on top. The Buddha is in constant response to the world. Anyway, so that's a little tidbit of iconography. And then to the Buddha's right and left, there are two of the foundational ancestors of our lineage, Mahakashapa, who has the staff, and Ananda, who's like this. I believe Mahakashapa is on the Buddha's left. Is that right? Yeah, and Ananda is on the Buddha's right. So Mahakashapa was the person who Shakyamuni Buddha entrusted the Dharma to, in the famous story where said that he came before the assembly, and that day he didn't give a talk. He picked up a flower and twirled it in his hand, and it said that Mahakashapa smiled. And the Buddha said, Mahakashapa, I entrust to you the wondrous mind of nirvana. And then that was the end of the assembly. So that legend is the legend of the origins of our lineage. So Mahakashapa then later on passed the Dharma to Ananda, and then down through the ages until today. So a Zen temple is very common for Mahakashapa and Ananda to be there with the Buddha. On the Buddha's left, we have the statue of Prajnaparamita, who's known as the mother of the Buddhas, and is the personification of wisdom. And here, in the case of wisdom, is not wisdom the way we think about it in general sense, like accumulation of a lot of knowledge, the wisdom of Prajnaparamita is like the very fountainhead of consciousness, the completely transparent and komyo. Thank you. Luminous, translucent and luminous fountainhead of all being, which is said to be the womb of the Tathagata, or the womb of the Buddhas. And that all beings are both held in this womb completely and are this womb. Our consciousness also is this womb. We are birthing and being birthed as Buddhas. This is the teaching of Prajnaparamita teachings. On the Buddha's right, there is a symbol. This is the symbol for the 1,000-armed Avalokitesvara, or Bodhisattva of compassion. We had one coming from China, and it just never got here. And the fellow that I purchased it from just stopped communicating about it. So one might show up someday, or not. But this is a placeholder. This is called a seed syllable, and it's a very ancient type of writing that is every personification of a Buddha or Bodhisattva will have a iconographical form. They will have a vibrational sound, and then they have a seed syllable which relates to that vibrational sound. So this is that for Avalokitesvara, kind of placeholder until. This is very beautiful. The 1,000-armed Avalokitesvara looks much like other Avalokitesvara statues, but with 1,000 arms that look like a aura surrounding the Avalokitesvara, and in the palm of each hand is an eye. So this is said to be the eye of wisdom. But Avalokitesvara uses the eye of wisdom as a means of touch. Right? Then on this side of the altar, if we move away from this, that's hanging there in the frame, is Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma is considered the first ancestor of Zen in China. And so that's a kind of ancestor altar to the ancestors of Zen. And then on this side in the frame, that is a Daigen Shuri Bosatsu. This is an earth spirit who is a protector of Buddhism all the way back from the time of Asoka, who was a king in India that was one of the big promoters of Buddhism. Probably why Buddhism survived was the patronage of King Ashoka. And there's said that this earth spirit of that time has traveled with Buddhism and has protected Buddhism and helped Buddhism to flourish wherever it goes. Interesting legends about Dogen Zenji returning from China. It's said that the Daigen Shuri Bosatsu traveled back with him as a white snake in his bag, and helped him to copy some very important spiritual texts the night before he left. It was too much, no way a person could copy it. But said Daigen Shuri Bosatsu helped him to make this copy of all these texts before he came back. And then the last one in this hall right now that I think of is Manjushri Bodhisattva, who sometimes is also called the sacred monk, and is typically enshrined in the meditation hall or in the monk's hall. And so this is a personification of wisdom that is in the form of a monk, and sits on a lion, and is always enshrined there in the meditation hall, and is in the meditation posture. Oftentimes Manjushri won't be in a meditation posture. We'll have lots of ornamentation like a bodhisattva, and we'll have a sword. That's a very common form of Manjushri. That's a review. That's a review. And
Pedro, can you say about the is it called Toba?
The Ihai. Yeah, this one says Sankai Bande. This says 3 worlds, myriad spirits, etc. And this is a kind of a placard that's used for, we make sutra recitations and offerings every day and dedicate to the welfare of all beings. And this becomes important in ritual work to do that. Coming back to a little bit what Anu was asking about, sometimes this sort of thing feels challenging to people. It depends a lot on your background. It might just feel very strange, like you haven't been around it. Or you may have grown up in a situation where there was a lot of it and you got burned by it, right? Or you might be somewhere in between, or in some other way. In relating with iconography, there's a way to appreciate its sacredness and its ordinariness at the same time. And that's what I always try to encourage people, is to, if it becomes overly kind of holy, then there's a way in which there's a projection of kind of goodness that has a opposite reaction of kind of devaluing the person who's encountering the iconography. And we really want to avoid that. That's not the purpose. The iconography is a gateway. And as that gateway opens this way, it opens this way too. So whatever is personified there in iconography is personified for the purposes of helping you to both see outwardly the manifestation of this being, of these qualities in the world, and also to see the internal manifestation and qualities of that being. So as you venerate Avalokiteshvara, for example, your own heart of compassion, you start to see it's not mine. Like I don't get to own it, but it's completely moves through me, as opposed to Avalokiteshvara is really, really great, and I obviously suck, right? And so I need to venerate a lot. That the idea is not that. The idea is that Avalokiteshvara is encourage you and inviting you to manifest your own heart of compassion very strongly. And that actually is an ordinary thing, but is a kind of ordinary, miraculous thing. And maybe that's where Zen sits on these kind of things. Hi.
Regarding the arising of bodhicitta,
Mm-hmm.
is this spontaneous, or is it something that can be kicked loose in people?
Mm. So bodhicitta refers to the mind of awakening, which oftentimes would also be interpreted as being like the mind that seeks the way. If you think about that in your life, the part of you that says, oh, maybe I'll go to the temple, or maybe I'll go to the church, or maybe I'll go to the woods, and I want to I want to step into some way of being that is deeply authentic and serves the most profound parts of my being and the profound aspects of the world. Okay, that's when people say bodhicitta, they're talking about that. That it's in all of our minds, or it is all of our minds. So in some traditions, there's a big emphasis on the individual cultivation of bodhicitta. In the Zen tradition, and I would say particularly within my experience, or the way I like to teach about it, is there's a teaching called Kannon Doko, which is famously hard to translate. It means something like the mysterious communication of supplication and response, which is super unsatisfying. But let me explain what it means a little bit. Kannon Doko, the Doko part, is like this changing of places. It's like when you're traveling, like say you're traveling with someone and they were leading you, and they knew where to go. And then pretty soon you learned about how to walk that road together. And that at some point you were kind of leading and they were following you. Like you got a hold of the situation. You learned how to use the map. You learned how to walk together. So your role changes a little bit. That's called that's doko. It means the exchange of roads. Kannon means to feel and to respond. And in one meaning of that is, as we feel a kind of yearning for liberation, for authenticity, for a true life of compassion and wisdom, that there are beings that can feel that and respond to it. So as we pay attention to it, it's not just that we create the bodhicitta, it's that there are other beings, your sangha, your community, your teachers, your seniors, your juniors, and personified aspects of the Dharma that may not be in human bodies, trees, wind, mountains. All of these things respond to that yearning. And in the responding to that yearning, this mysterious exchange happens. That the bodhicitta, my own inspiration to live the life of an awakened being, becomes stronger in me. Not because I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and said, I'm going to do it, and I was strong enough to do it, but because I listened deeply enough to my yearning heart, and I offered that to the world and to myself. So sometimes that feels like kicked loose. Sometimes it really does. Like when you start paying attention to your own deep yearning, it can really mess with you. And on the whole, I think that's good, but it can be really challenging and it can be jarring. Like something can happen very quickly, or you can have a kind of a moment where someone appears in the rain outside your car, like we've talked about before. And it's like, boom, what a gift to have a bodhisattva like that appear. But they won't appear if we don't also exercise our yearning. That's the kind of basic teaching. Other times, it's very slow. You know, we're just kind of putting in time, doing the best we can, trying to, I think it was Linda last week, you were saying, showing up and doing as best we can in the moment. Good enough most of the time. And in that good enough most of the time, you're turning towards it. You're not being too hard on yourself, like, am I being sincere enough or 100% or whatever? Then you just, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, wow. I thought I needed to drive towards something. But actually, there's this gem that's right here already in my cloak. And I can appreciate it because I'm not driving towards something. Many different qualities can be present through that.
So in the chant we say, all my past and harmful karma I fully avow. I realized this morning that I don't really know what a vow means. And if somebody asked me who was sort of new, I thought, what would I say? I could probably, make up something and fool around.
Yeah.
So that's one part of the question. The second part is, we practice this, we chant this. So we're avowing, and you're going to tell me what that means, this past and harmful karma. But meanwhile, I don't really know how to ask it. So what's happening then as we, moment to moment, here, we're probably I believe the teaching is we are continuing. Karma is continuing.
Yeah.
Karma isn't stopping anywhere. So how is this working in our life, this chant?
Yeah.
That's kind of the second part.
Great.
I hope that's a real question.
I believe it is. Yeah. It didn't have the fine marked question mark on it, but it was all there. It was all question. So it was really interesting down in LA this time. We were preparing for a big ceremony, a big precept ceremony that will happen in the fall. At Zen Shuji is part of the 100th anniversary celebrations of Soto Zen in North America. And so the preceptor for that is Akiba Roshi, who's a longtime leader of the Soto Zen school in North America. And so he kept he's so funny because we're all just like working like dogs to get all the rituals together for this thing, right? And then he'll kind of break into this teaching moment. He'll like wander into the hall and start breaking into this teaching moment and start going off about stuff. And at first we're all a little bit like, would you shut the old guy up, because we want to, we're trying to practice here, But it's wonderful because you can't, because he's Akiba Roshi, right? And so you have to stop. And then in a couple moments, then you can see everyone's heart kind of turn a little bit and remember like, oh, this is what we're doing. This is why we're here. And the thing he kept saying this time over and over again, as he was saying, people think they know what a vow is. People think like, oh, I'm going to get rid of my karma by repenting. And he was like, the thing is, you don't even know all the bad stuff you're doing, right? In the Jukai, and that's the emphasis in the Jukai ceremony and this way that we're doing it. The emphasis is there's a term shojo muryo, which means the countless small transgressions, right? That's what we're repenting. It's one thing to repent the stuff that we know we're doing. That's important. But he was really emphasizing that there's a constant flow of not living up to our Buddha nature, like a constant flow of it. And so how do we practice a recognition of that, which is not self-flagellation or original sin, but it is a different way of being in which I don't assume my own rightness and I don't assume my place as a place to defend. I'm a conduit, and to the extent that I can surrender to the true compassion of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then something can come through me. And I want that. And because I want that, I have to admit all of the ways in which I mostly don't see, the ways in which I don't rise to that occasion. So avowing is not just something we do to get rid of a bad thing we've done, but it's a constant practice. And so we chant that, just like anything we do in formal practice, we do it in formal practice as a way to make it live more fully in our life in entirety. So as we chant that, we're coming back to that state of being in which we're relinquishing our grasping after being pure. And then a different thing can happen there. Actually, purification can happen there. When we're grasping after being pure, we're locked in this dichotomy of the good me and the bad me, and then we really get lost. And that's something that I think this school particularly has to offer us, is a deep tradition that does not say we should respect those who have become great, and we should disregard those who haven't, but that we should see that all beings are made up of both awakening and delusion, and that is in beings exterior to me and in beings interior to me, and that's where the real compassion flows. So it's a deep compassion practice to practice avowing like that.
Thank you.
This is a real question.
Yeah.
It may be a personal question,
Mm-hmm.
and so I would invite you not to answer it if you don't want to.
Sure.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, when we had the second,
Mm-hmm.
it's ridiculous. A couple of weeks ago, when we had the second Eco Dharma
Yeah.
lecture, at the end of it, you said that this had changed something for you, and I would love to hear you expand on what has changed in your thinking.
So one thing that came through, those of you who participated in the Eco Dharma videos, or if any of you went on to the Tricycle website and watched any of those, we watched a couple here as a group. And I was so happy that in the two videos that we watched, and I watched some of the other ones that were on that series too, that I heard other Buddhist leaders speaking about the enormous complexity of the ecological problems that we're facing, and advocating for a deep regard of human participation in the solution, not only a kind of denigration of human life, which is a constant drumbeat that I've been hearing, say, for the past decade. That a lot of very anti-human ways of talking about ecological problems and ecological solutions, and I think that's doing a huge amount of damage to our being, and is not going to lead to real ecological solutions. It's going to lead to a lot more pain, and that's us then re-inflicting that pain on the world as a whole. So that was a thing that was really inspiring me to hear that articulated through a Buddhist lexicon and way of thinking about things, because it was fresh to me. It isn't what I'm accustomed to hearing around a lot of that activism. And so I feel, I would say I feel encouraged that there are more nuanced conversations going on. And I'm very worried about the toll that the tone of our response to ecological issues, what the effects that it is having on us as a whole. And people oftentimes reference children in that case, but I really don't think it's just children. It's just, that's a good place for us to say, I'm so worried about the youth. And I always kind of feel like, well, what about the adults? Because we're pretty messed up too. But there's a way in which we have a caretaking responsibility to youth that then allows us to say, I'm really worried about the youth because I have a caretaking responsibility. But actually I have a caretaking responsibility for everyone, not only the youth. And so that's a thing that I have been concerned about. And because it was brought up in those conversations, it helped me feel like, oh, maybe there's a way for me to enter those conversations in a way that I've been hesitant to. Because I don't want to be a naysayer, but at the same time, I have real questions about the way that much of the activism around that has appeared to me. Hi.
So, at some point recently, you encouraged me to take moments in my life and in my day to feel the spiritual gravity of living. And in those moments, I feel everything becomes heavy. Sometimes I become sad. But most deeply, I think it's yearning. And sometimes it's so heavy that I want to turn it out to find something to satisfy it. Is it enough to just yearn?
So that's a very delicate place, a very important place. And the part of us that wants to turn out to find something, it has a role to play. Right? Because our yearning, it's like, where can I turn? What can I do? So we need to listen to that. But the only way we'll be able to walk towards those things with integrity is to feel the structure of our own skeleton. If we expand the metaphor and say, taking a moment to feel the gravity of being, the weight of being. That weight and the ground that you're on is the whole reason you have a skeletal system. And that's exactly true in the spiritual world as much as it is in the physical world. Those aren't really separate things, but if we separate them just for the sake of the metaphor, you have a spiritual skeleton. You have a body, a spiritual body that responds to the gravity of being. And in many ways, we've ignored that and we try to create solutions. That's the outward movement that isn't really connected. We create solutions out here to take care of the problems that remind us of that gravity. But for it to be spiritually integrated, we have to feel that whole skeleton. And then the movements towards solutions are related back to the ground through our skeletal being. So that's a process of spiritual growth, to spend time there with the yearning and then to feel the way in which it connects back down to the ground. And in the same way that we do that, if you think about like when you watch kids learning to walk, of course my grandson's just at that age now where he's grabbing and standing up at the table and stuff, and at first their toes are just like this and their heels are off the ground and they're kind of just doing this, but they're so happy to be up that's it. And then over a few weeks, then now his heels are on the ground, right? And now he can kind of go around a little bit. I can hold him like this and and I can let go and he'll kind of go like that for a little bit. And you can see that there's this whole process that's happening in which he's learning the relationship between his skeletal structure, the weight of his body, and the world that's there. And then you think about the miracle of walking, let alone like dancing, running. That all becomes possible through that very foundational relationship. And then falling. That's the thing we don't teach enough here in the West. In Japan, people don't break their hips nearly as much because they sit on the ground. And so they're used to getting up and down from the ground. And so when people fall, they tend to roll. And when they roll, then they don't like break their hip, etc. Not always. Plenty of people break their hip, but they have better relationship to the ground. So that's the process that we're going through in that spiritual growth. And then our own yearning allows us to move closer to things and leave things behind that we no longer are serving us, but through that connection and integration. Nagarjuna is one of the most famous teachers in our lineage. He has a famous statement that says, the ground on which you fall down is the same ground on which you stand up. I think this is one of the most profound things, and you can study this all the way down to the very fountainhead of your own consciousness. That the way that the same place that you get trapped in a thought or a feeling or an idea, and your whole being gets very opaque in relationship to that thing you're grasping, that exact same place is the place of liberation. It's the place of the total freedom of the mind. And so you can study that, and then your own movement grows.
How do we study that?
Stay right there. Yeah, and you feel, and the thing about this is it's a growing body of trust that is necessary, and so don't just force yourself. Not to turn kind of masochistic, like I'm feeling bad, so this must be good for me. That's not the point, right? But the point is that if I stay in that place of yearning and feeling the weight, that there's work to do to not make it morose, right? Because that's one of the things you'll want to do. If I can make this kind of like, then, okay, I can get out of it, right? Because now I can call it something. I have a way to contextualize it, etc. I can cut myself off from the experience of it by just making it bad, calling myself whatever I'm going to call myself. And you'll do that. But then the practice becomes, okay, no, what am I actually experiencing there? And how, and this is the big thing, how does it reconnect down to the ground? And how do I find my balance in that place? When it's really bad, so one way I experienced it, when our daughter was in the hospital and her life was in danger, the way I experienced it was less like gravity, and it was more like like a wind that could not be dealt with. It was just like a massive headwind that would just knock me over if I turned even slightly, bam, on the ground, and just in total panic. And what could I do? And that was horrible. Don't recommend it, but you probably will be in your life at some point where that's how it is. So what you do is you can turn and feel the wind, and you have to feel for the place that you don't just get thrown to the ground. And there is a place that's like very sharp in which you can stay present with the total impossibility of life and not be destroyed. And then you'll turn slightly off and you'll be thrown to the ground. And the being thrown to the ground is just as important a learning as when you're able to stay right there in the place where the wind goes both directions. And the play between those things then makes you a broad being. And that's what looks like the slow transformation of practice. I have to show you something very funny. Upside down time. Can you see it? So the clock was upside down, and when Genjo turned up, it was upside down. I was like, oh, I better turn it over. And then I thought, that's the most hilarious thing I've seen in a long time. So I will encourage you all when you go home, maybe turn your clocks over, and then you can still figure out what time it is if you need to. But then you could just laugh every time you look at it. This kind of ridiculous little manipulation box that we've all enslaved ourselves to.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.